I'll be really brief. First, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm here with my friend Julian Leeser, the Shadow Attorney General, a bunch of other members of Parliament, and the PM will be here tomorrow. And I think I can speak on behalf of Julian and others that really we're here to listen more than talk. And I hope that over the next few days we get the opportunity to do that. Please come up and say good day and pick my brain and help fill it with some useful information. I think you're here and you've been part of this session on education because you get how important education is. None of us want to live in a country where your chances depend upon who your parents are, how wealthy they are, where you live, or the colour of your skin. But the awful truth is we are. We still are. And the education data that keeps flooding across my desk tells us that. The NAPLAN data that came out this week reminds us of that. And it reminds me of the responsibility that I've got as the Education Minister, because I truly believe that education is the most powerful cause for good in this country. It's what can change that. There's good things happening. There's good stuff that I see come across my desk every year. The number of Indigenous students in early education this year is up 7% on what it was last year. When I was here last year, I was able to tell you that we just signed an agreement to fix the funding of Northern Territory public schools. That's big, that's important. That doubles the amount of money that the Australian government gives to Northern Territory schools so that we make good what David Gonski told us we needed to do more than a decade ago. But since then, over the last year, we've now signed agreements with every single state and territory right across the country to do the same. And that's important because 9 out of 10 Indigenous kids live outside the Northern Territory. The other good news is that there's more Indigenous young people at university today than there were last year or the year before that or the year before that. We're making real progress. But still, if I'm going to be brutally honest, the fact is that about 1 in 2 young people who are 30 today have a uni degree, but it's 1 in 10 Indigenous young people. And Indigenous young people are still less likely to finish high school than other students, more likely to start school behind, less likely to get a chance at early education. So 3 things that will happen over the next 12 months that I just wanted to put in people's minds as we think about what's next and what more we need to do. Next year, we will get rid of something called the activity test, which stops families from making sure that their children get access to childcare, to early education and care, and we're replacing it with a 3-day guarantee that guarantees that every child can get access to subsidised childcare or early education and care every week. That's 3 days a week, but for Indigenous kids it will be 5 days a week, and it will start from January next year. And we're doing that for a reason, because the data tells us that Indigenous kids are more likely to start behind than other kids. And if you start school behind, you're more likely to stay behind. And so we've got to make the investment in the right areas if we really want to make a difference. Last year when I was here, yothuyindifoundation grabbed me and talked to me about not just the 2 toolbox education that you get at Gulkula and all of the other schools in the area, but also the fact that often the teacher in the classroom will come from where I grew up in Sydney or in Melbourne, but it's the assistant teachers that are in the classroom who are Yolngu people, who are local people, who are often the real teacher in the classroom, if we're honest. But expecting them to go to Darwin to become a qualified teacher is a bit ridiculous. And we've got to change the way that we provide that education and support so that you can get that qualification here closer to home. And there's some good stuff that's happening there. There's more that I hope that we'll see over the course of the next 12 months as we develop an Indigenous teacher strategy. And then finally, what I want to do with universities is what we've now been able to do with schools and apply the Gonski model to universities, so that extra wraparound funding support is provided on a needs basis to students, so that we don't just have more Indigenous young people start a uni degree, but more Indigenous young people finish a university degree. And we'll see that roll out from next year as well, and that means hundreds of millions of dollars invested in the right area to make sure that more young people finish a university degree. So there's a few things that are good news. There's a few things that I hope I'll be able to report back next year showing real progress. But the truth is this is big, and it's not going to be solved in 1 year or 10 years. It's going to take deliberate and concerted effort, not just by me or by us, but by future governments as well on both sides of Parliament. That's why I'm glad that both sides of Parliament are here today, and why I'm so glad that so many of you are here to be part of this conversation, because you know, like I do, that education is the key that unlocks this door. Thanks very much.